Good morning. Good morning. I'm Rachel Bronson, President and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. I would like to welcome you to this news event sponsored by the Bulletin in partnership this year with the Elders. We will hear shortly from the Elders Chair, Dr. Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, and its Vice Chair, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, about their focus on the increasing threats posed by nuclear proliferation and the climate emergency. Shortly, you will also hear from members of the Bulletin Science and Security Board, led by our chair, Dr. Robert Rosner, and from the Bulletin's executive chair, Jerry Brown. We are grateful to all of our partners and supporters from around the world, some of whom are here today. And I want to particularly recognize the Harris School of Public Policy, located at the campus of the University of Chicago, where the Bulletin is headquartered. A school committed to training tomorrow's leaders to tackle humanity's greatest public policy challenges. The Bulletin is thus joining with tomorrow's leaders and today's most authoritative political ones to assert that the current environment is profoundly unstable and urgent action and immediate engagement is required by all. We are here this morning to update you on the Doomsday Clock and our concerns about the challenges posed by man-made threats to our existence. The Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists sets the Doomsday Clock each year to help answer two questions. Is humanity safer or at greater risk this year compared to last year, and this year compared to the nearly 75 years we have been setting the symbolic clock? November 2020 will mark the 75th anniversary of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, an organization founded by scientists and joined by journalists, religious leaders, political leaders, and civic leaders and activists around the world committed to ensuring that science and technology are used to advance a safer and healthier planet. Since its inception, the Bulletin's Doomsday Clock has been measured in minutes and was set 2 minutes to midnight in 2018, the closest it had been to midnight since 1953, for a time when both the US and the Soviet Union had tested hydrogen bombs. It has been set as far away from midnight as 17 minutes to midnight at the end of the Cold War. When the board kept the clock at 2 minutes to midnight in 2019, we argued then that the global situation was abnormal, and that this new abnormal was simply too volatile and too dangerous to accept as a continuing state of world affairs. Today, we feel no more optimistic. In fact, both the nuclear and climate conditions are worsening, and we note that over the last 2 years, we have seen influential leaders denigrate and discard the most effective methods for addressing complex threats, international agreements with strong verification regimes, in favor of their own narrow interests and domestic political gain. By undermining cooperative science and law-based approaches to managing the most urgent threats to humanity, leaders have helped to create a situation that will, if unaddressed, lead to catastrophe sooner rather than later. It would be a privilege and an honor to move the hands of the Doomsday Clock away from midnight, but our current situation does not warrant that. The Doomsday Clock continues to tick forward, requiring us to recalibrate both our clock and the urgency we bring to today's challenges. As far as the Bulletin and the Doomsday Clock is concerned, the world has entered into a realm of a 2-minute warning, a period when danger is high and the margin for error is low. To move the clock closer to midnight moves us into a period that requires newfound vigilance and focus from leaders and citizens alike, as if every second matters. The moment demands attention and new creative responses if decision makers continue to fail to act, pretending that being inside the 2 minutes is no more urgent than the preceding period. Citizens around the world should rightfully echo the words of climate activist Greta Thunberg and ask, "How dare you?" With this in mind, I'd like to now ask Jerry Brown, Mary Robinson, and Ban Ki-moon to approach the clock to reveal the 2020 time. Today, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moves the hands of the Doomsday Clock. It is 100 seconds to midnight. Thank you. I now invite members of the Bulletin Science and Security Board to provide the key findings of the Bulletin's report that is now available on our website at thebulletin.org. After the presentation of key findings, we will welcome Ban Ki-moon, Jerry Brown, and Mary Robinson to the dais to discuss how leaders and citizens around the world must respond. So by way of introduction, Robert Rosner is the chair of the Bulletin Science and Security Board and the William E. Rather Distinguished Service Professor in the Departments of Astronomy and Astrophysics and Physics and the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Dr. Rosner has served as the director of Argonne National Laboratories, where he had also served as chief scientist. Sharon Squassoni is a research professor at the Institute of International Science and Technology Policy at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Shivan Kartha is a senior scientist at the Stockholm Environmental Institute. He is a lead author of the upcoming IPCC Sixth Assessment Report to be released in 2021. Robert Latiff, a retired United States Air Force Major General, is a fellow at the University of Notre Dame Institute of Advanced Study. He is a member of the Intelligence Community Studies Board of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Dr. Rosner.
Thank you. My name is Robert Rosner, and I am chair of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. The Doomsday Clock is being set at 100 seconds to midnight. The fact that the Doomsday Clock hands now sit a mere 100 seconds from midnight signals really bad news indeed. What we have called the new abnormal last year, a dismal state of affairs in the realms of nuclear security and climate change, now has become an apparently enduring, disturbing reality in which things are not getting better. We have indeed normalized a very dangerous world in terms of the risks of nuclear warfare and climate change. Of particular concern is the undermining of the public's ability to sort out what's true from what's patently false by information warfare, subverting our ability to arrive at a consensus on the solutions needed to achieve positive change. Past experience has taught us, even during the most dismal periods of the Cold War, we can as a people come together to address our challenges. It is now high time to do so again. I would now like to turn it over to my colleagues who serve on the Bulletin Science and Security Board to highlight the many topics we did consider when setting the 2020 Doomsday Clock. Sharon.
Thank you. I'm Sharon Squassoni, and I'm going to cover the nuclear portion. I have to admit, at first, we set the clock in November. This was before recent military actions by the U.S. and Iran, Iran's statement or threat that it might leave the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and North Korea's abandonment of talks with the United States. The time we set reflects the considered judgment by the board that we are rapidly losing our bearings in a nuclear weapons landscape that may expand beyond our recognition. And recent events only confirm our view that it is 100 seconds to midnight. The arms control agreements that bounded our worldview, that shaped deterrence and the arms race, may be gone by next year. It is too dangerous to sleepwalk through this newly unstable environment, and we urgently need realistic steps to deal with the following developments. On Iran. Since the U.S. withdrew from the Iran nuclear agreement, Iran has slowly been reducing its compliance. Throughout 2019, Iran increased its stockpile of low-enriched uranium, increased its uranium enrichment levels, and added new and improved centrifuges. Early in January, Iran announced it would no longer observe limits imposed under the Iran nuclear deal on the number of centrifuges that it uses to enrich uranium. This high-stakes game of poker with the remaining members of the deal recently backfired. Iran wanted the other members to make good on their promises of lifting sanctions and increasing investment, but the opposite happened Germany, the UK, and France could no longer ignore Iran's actions and triggered the dispute resolution process under the deal. Iran then announced it would withdraw from the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty if the Europeans took it further to the United Nations. So this year could see not just the complete collapse of the Iran nuclear deal, but also a significant blow to the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. On North Korea, since 2018, there's been hope that despite the odds, Mr. Trump's unorthodox approach might actually bring North Korea to the negotiating table. And despite an early summit in Hanoi last year and subsequent working-level meetings, no real progress ensued. And so by the end of 2019, Chairman Kim Jong-un announced that he would demonstrate a new strategic weapon and indicated that North Korea would forge ahead without sanctions relief. Until now, the willingness of both sides to continue a dialogue was positive, but Chairman Kim seems to have lost faith in President Trump's negotiating ability. And in an election year, it's not clear how much attention the Trump administration can afford to pay to North Korea. The third area is arms control. The U.S. officially withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019, citing Russian violations and a need to counter Chinese nuclear and conventional intermediate range missiles. The U.S. has not yet agreed to extend New START, which is a seminal treaty that limits U.S. and Russian deployed strategic nuclear weapons and delivery systems, although Russia has been requesting this since 2017. And even though such a step is easy and benefits the United States. Without New START, an extension of New START, the new Russian nuclear-tipped hypersonic Avangard missile will be unconstrained. And amid rumors that Mr. Trump disliked the Open Skies Treaty, Congress passed a bill to force the president to wait 4 months if he sought to withdraw. The Open Skies Treaty provides aerial overflights to build confidence and transparency around the world. On the other hand, U.S. negotiators are enthusiastic about convincing China to engage in arms control, which is unfortunately not reciprocated either by China or Russia. The three countries disagree on whether to pursue negotiations on outer space, missile defenses, and cyber warfare. But one of the few issues they do agree on, they all oppose the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which opened for signature in 2017. Without conscious efforts to reinvigorate arms control, the world is headed into an unregulated nuclear environment. No one should want a return to the intense arms race that characterized the early decades of the nuclear age. Yet the means are there. The U.S. and Russia have massive stockpiles of warheads and fissile material in reserve from which to draw if they choose. And should China decide to build up to U.S. and Russian arsenal levels, a development previously dismissed as unlikely but now being debated, deterrence calculations could become more complicated, making the situation more dangerous. An unconstrained North Korea, coupled with a more assertive China, could further destabilize Northeast Asian security. And an Iran that no longer sees the Non-Proliferation Treaty membership as being in its interest is an even more destabilizing actor in the Middle East. So in sum, the situation is extremely dangerous and demands an emergency response. Shiva.
Thank you. I'm Shivan Kartha, also with the Science Security Board. I'll speak primarily to climate change. The state of the world does indeed demand an emergency response. And so for the first time, we've decided to set the Doomsday Clock past the 2-minute mark to 100 seconds. When that 2-minute benchmark was first reached, but not passed, in 1953, the sole consideration of the Bulletin was the nuclear threat, and the prospect of human-caused climate change was mere academic curiosity. But since that time, greenhouse gas pollution from burning fossil fuels that humankind has dumped into the atmosphere has risen 6-fold. Not surprisingly, the Earth has warmed about 1 degree centigrade. And if we do nothing to curb our greenhouse pollution, the Earth will warm by another few degrees. A few degrees might not sound like anything to worry about, much less like an emergency. But let me put it in perspective. During the depths of the last ice age, the Earth was only a few degrees colder. Yet its surface was utterly transformed. Seas were hundreds of feet lower, and their margins were far from the coastal communities where now a third of the world's population lives. Their waters were locked up in ice sheets miles thick, covering large areas of land where major cities now stand. As the Earth warmed out of that frigid state, it only took 5 degrees of warming to melt those ice sheets, raise sea levels, and rearrange ecosystems across the continents. It drove many species extinct and allowed others to flourish. Humankind was one of those species that flourished as the Earth settled into a comfortable and stable climate that, as it turned out, was hospitable to the emergence of organized human civilization. If the Earth warms by what we tend to think of as just a few degrees, if humankind pushes the climate into the opposite of an ice age, whatever exactly that is, or even pushes the climate halfway there, we have no reason to be confident that such a world will remain hospitable to human civilization. To test the limits of Earth's habitable temperature is madness. It's a madness akin to the nuclear madness that is again threatening the world. Even at only 1 degree of warming, people across the world are suffering the impacts. In case we've forgotten what this past year brought, India was ravaged by record-breaking heat waves and by record-breaking floods, and both took heavy tolls on human lives. Wildfires raged from the Arctic to Australia. They now persist with an unprecedented intensity, extent, and duration that makes them harder to contain. It causes more harm to people in their homes. It destroys the land's ability even to recover. The very idea of a limited fire season is becoming a thing of the past. And communities from the Caribbean to Mozambique will be struggling for years to recover from the devastating hurricanes that pummeled them this past year, just as communities from the Philippines to Puerto Rico are still struggling to recover from intense hurricanes of earlier years. Despite these devastating warnings, and although some governments are echoing many scientists' use of the term climate emergency, their policies are hardly commensurate to an emergency. The highly anticipated UN Climate Action Summit in September fell far short of Secretary General Antonio Guterres' request that countries come, quote, not with beautiful speeches, but with concrete plans. The negotiations in Madrid that followed in December were no better. A UN report was released underscoring what was already well known. The pledges to curb greenhouse gases that governments committed to pursue by 2030 under the Paris Climate Agreement, they would need to be scaled up 8-fold to be consistent with the agreed aim of keeping warming well below 2 degrees. And now, with 5 years past since that celebrated Paris breakthrough, only 10 years remain to achieve such cuts. We're far off course. The greenhouse gas pollution continues to rise, reaching record levels this past year, when science and plain arithmetic are clear. Emissions need to head towards zero. There's no question this is an emergency. The hope that humankind may yet shift course does exist. It lies in the fact that more and more people are grasping the reality of that emergency. And this is despite the active disinformation campaigns that continue to obscure the clarity of the scientific consensus on climate change, and despite some leaders' willingness to attend to and even amplify that disinformation. The engagement, activism, and protest that's emerging now is akin to the movements triggered by nuclear disaster and nuclear weapons fears in the 70s and 80s. The Bulletin takes heart in this mounting insistence that our leaders heed the science and begin acting like this is the emergency that it is. Thank you.
I'm Robert Latif, member of the Science and Security Board. I'll discuss information warfare and some other disruptive technologies. For sure, nuclear war and climate change are indeed existential threats to humanity. Yet there are other developments in technology that portend a dangerous global instability. Cyber-enabled information warfare strikes at the very heart of what makes human interaction possible: information and trust. Add to that artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, biological threats, and the movement of conflict to outer space, and we have a witch's brew of ingredients for global conflict. The continued use in 2019 of untruths, exaggerations, and misrepresentations by world leaders in response to what they deem fake news has made worse an already dangerous situation. Active political antagonism by government towards science and disdain for expert opinion create fear and doubt regarding well-established science about climate change and other urgent challenges. In 2019, for example, hostility toward experts manifested itself in the wholesale trashing of respected science advisory boards. The U.S. administration ordered that 1/3 of the existing science committees be disbanded. The emergence of so-called deep fakes, audio and video recordings that are essentially undetectable as false, threatens to further undermine the ability to separate truth from fiction. And the resulting falsehoods hold the potential to create economic, social, and military chaos. Senior world leaders publishing doctored videos and photos of political adversaries seem to set a horrible example of what may come next. If nuclear weapons, climate change, and information warfare weren't bad enough, other new technologies aggravated the danger in 2019. Genetic engineering and synthetic biology technologies are now increasingly affordable and spreading rapidly. Dangerous regimes continue to work on potential pathogens. Artificial intelligence develops at a frenzied pace. In addition to the concern about its use in weapons that make kill decisions, AI is now being used in or planned for military command and control systems. In 2019, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency initiated work on a battlefield system that can decide and act on its own. And Russia announced a successful field test of its AI-controlled combat command and control system. There's increasing investment in hypersonic weapons that will severely limit the times available to targeted nations and create a dangerous degree of ambiguity and uncertainty that could lead to rapid escalation. At a minimum, these weapons are highly destabilizing and presage a new arms race. In 2019, Russia announced the deployment of the Avangard hypersonic missile glide vehicle, and the U.S. successfully tested a hypersonic cruise missile. Meanwhile, space has become a new arena for weapons development, with multiple countries testing and deploying anti-satellite or ASAT capabilities, and the United States creating a new military service, the Space Force, one of whose main goals is to prepare for space combat. In 2019, the U.S. Secretary of the Air Force publicly threatened to conduct a show of force in space. India tested a kinetic ASAT. Russia launched yet another Inspector satellite capable of close approaches, and the U.S. administration called for plans to station missile defense interceptors in orbit. Physicists discuss the concept of unstable equilibrium, in which a system, if pushed only slightly, will accelerate away from equilibrium, and I underline accelerate away, in an attempt to reach a lower energy state. Just as in physics, so too can a fragile global peace be upset by a seemingly minor event. It seems the world is a pressure cooker in which a disturbance or an imperfection somewhere could create such an event. The military is already under enormous stress with multiple repeated deployments. The system is highly complex, heavily computer-controlled, and tightly networked. combined with the recent more aggressive and bellicose posture of the most highly armed countries, an uneasy equilibrium exists around the world. It is a high-energy system that only requires a simple mistake somewhere in a world bristling with weapons for a war to start and escalate catastrophically. For a variety of reasons that include a corrupted and manipulated media environment, democratic governments and other institutions that should be working to address these threats have failed to rise to the challenge, and that must change.
Thank you. To the Bulletin Science and Security Board. They will return to the dais shortly to take your questions. But as they exit the dais, I now welcome Ban Ki-moon, Jerry Brown, and Mary Robinson to the dais. Thank you. Thank you. As they approach, I will do some introductions. Mary Robinson is the chair of the elders. She served formerly as the president of Ireland and as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ban Ki-moon is the deputy chair of the elders and served formerly as the UN Secretary General and Foreign Minister of South Korea. And Jerry Brown is the executive chair of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and the former governor of the state of California. To help us make sense of what can be done about what you just heard from the Science and Security Board, I now turn the microphone over to Dr. Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Rachel. Governor Brown, Chair Bob Rosner, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of myself, Ban Ki-moon, and all the elders, it's a great honor to be here today for what can only be described as a solemn occasion. I must say, as I listened to the excellent but devastating presentation of the scientists, I felt more and more a strong personal reaction, the reaction of an angry granny. This is not acceptable. When Nelson Mandela founded the Elders in 2007, he spoke of the need to support courage where there is fear, foster agreement where there is conflict, and inspire hope where there is despair. I often recall these words, but rarely do they feel as important as they do today. The Doomsday Clock is a globally recognized indicator of the vulnerability of our existence. It's a striking metaphor for the precarious state of the world. But most frighteningly, as we have just heard, it's a metaphor backed by rigorous scientific scrutiny. This is no mere analogy. We are now 100 seconds to midnight, and the world needs to wake up. Our planet faces two simultaneous existential threats: the climate crisis and nuclear weapons. We're faced by a gathering storm of extinction-level consequences, and time is running out. The science of the climate crisis makes it imperative that we take urgent action in 2020. We need a change of mindset in politics, finance, business, and civil society, one that enables us to keep temperature rises at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius, whilst protecting the rights, dignity, and livelihoods of those affected by the shift to a carbon-neutral economy. Not to do so will be a death sentence for humanity, and yet world leaders continue to ignore the science. International climate summits fail to reach agreement, and investment in the exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels continues to increase. Despite this dire picture of failing leadership and narrow self-interest, we can draw hope and inspiration from the young schoolchildren and activists who are striking under the banner Fridays for Future. Here in the United States, I've been hugely inspired by the way so many people from politics, business, labor unions, faith groups, women's and youth movements declared they were still in the Paris Accord, despite the federal administration's withdrawal, including, of course, Governor Brown in California. However, whilst public pressure gives us a sliver of hope for our climate, the opposite is true on nuclear. As long as nuclear weapons remain in existence, it is inevitable that they will one day be used, whether by accident, miscalculation, or design. Yet the scale of a potential catastrophe and discussion on what could be done to de-escalate the risk of a nuclear war has been given a shockingly low amount of consideration by political decision makers, opinion formers, and the public. This is why the elders have proposed a nuclear minimization agenda that we believe would significantly contribute to reducing the threat of nuclear catastrophe. Our position is summed up by what we call the 4 Ds. Doctrine: every nuclear state should make an unequivocal no first use declaration. De-alerting: almost all warheads should be taken off high alert status. Deployment: substantially reduce the 1/4 of all nuclear warheads that are currently operationally deployed. Decrease numbers: dramatically cut the number of nuclear weapons in existence. However, such proposals will never come to pass if we don't first defend and strengthen the nuclear arms controls that still exist. The elders believe this must begin with the United States and the Russian Federation negotiating the extension of New START, the only remaining bilateral agreement between these two nuclear superpowers, without delay. I note that President Putin has explicitly said he is ready to do this. So I urge President Trump to respond in kind so both men can get down to business. They should recall and reiterate the declaration of their predecessors, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, that, and I quote, "a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought." These were pioneering words at the time, and the world needs to hear them again. Such a step would help create an environment for nuclear disarmament ahead of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference later this year, and inspire other leaders to take similarly bold steps. Let such a nuclear détente be the way the world marks both the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the 50th anniversary of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Let this year be the start of a new era of nuclear negotiations. Let's hope to return here in a year's time to reveal the hands on this clock are further from midnight than they are today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bond.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you to Governor Jerry Brown. It's a great pleasure to see you again. Thank you, Rachel Bronson, and all the distinguished members of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and distinguished guests, media, and gathered here today. As our chair of the elders, Mary Robinson, has just said, it is also for me an honor to be here today to unveil the Doomsday Clock, but with the solemn sense of duty and moral responsibility, and also frightening sense of what is happening in this world without any governance structures of global disarmament of nuclear weapons. These are perilous times. The alarming rise in tensions in the Middle East threatens war, and the return to nuclear weapons development in Iran. The world waits to see how North Korea will respond to stalled negotiations over the nuclear ambitions. In that regard, I'm just struck to hear the news released by North Korea that it would not be committed to previously made nuclear disarmament. This is a denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This is again very, very surprising and shocking that North Korea is now officially made it happen on Tuesday. The situation in Kashmir between nuclear-armed Pakistan and India remains unpredictable and highly dangerous. Such tensions demand responsible global leadership. But instead, over the last year, we have seen precisely the opposite. We have seen termination of the intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, division and uncertainty regarding the upcoming review conference of the NPT, and most worryingly, the absence of any meaningful negotiations between the United States and Russia to extend New START. It would send a deeply negative message to the world if New START is allowed to expire in February next year, 2021. This would not only eliminate the remaining constraints on deployed nuclear arsenals, but also remove the monitoring and inspection capabilities, which have provided both sides with increased transparency regarding nuclear capability. On the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the elders believe the world must seize the opportunities presented by the review conference that begins in April. This treaty is the backbone of the multilateral consensus on nuclear arms control, and yet disagreement and frustrations between its signatories mean there is a significant risk that the conference could conclude without an agreed outcome, like what had happened in 2015. That's a scenario that would undermine the treaty and could even trigger withdrawal by other member states. Alongside the potential expiry of New START, there is a disastrous scenario for the world. It exemplifies the failures of global leadership and the weakness of the multilateral system in the face of isolationist politics that sees diplomacy as a zero-sum game rather than a means of finding common solutions to common challenges. At a time when world leaders should be focused on the clear and present dangers of nuclear escalation and the climate emergency, climate crisis, we are instead witnessing denial, disregard, and dangerous brinksmanship. The existential risk of climate change and nuclear war are increasing just as the decision-making frameworks to address them are unraveling, from the Paris Agreement on Climate Change to the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, despondency of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to impotency at the United Nations Security Council. Our mechanisms for collaboration are being undermined when we need them most. To echo Mary Robinson, we must see urgent action on the climate crisis in 2020. All countries must come to COP26 in Glasgow in November with the clear plans and strong commitment for delivering carbon net zero commitment by 2050. We must see an immediate end to the investment in and exploration of fossil fuels. We must heed the demands of the young people on our streets and listen to the science. We cannot negotiate with the nature. We also have to listen to the warning of nature. The United States must somehow begin to demonstrate global leadership at the federal level too. Without it, we cannot hope to meet the targets that will keep global warming to manageable levels. Without U.S. leadership and participation, there will be no winners from this climate crisis. We will all become losers. In the end, we will only overcome these existential threats by working together, and to do so, the world's need to re-energize multilateralism. I do believe there is an opportunity to this in this coming year. As a former Secretary General, I am deeply concerned by the fact that multilateralism is now under serious attack by those countries, particularly most powerful countries, who has been playing global leadership based on this global governing framework, multilateralism, the United Nations, which is symbolized by this multilateralism. Ladies and gentlemen, 2020, this year, marks 75 years since the end of the Second World War and the birth of nuclear age, and indeed the founding of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. It also marks, most importantly, 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. This is an opportunity for the world leaders and citizens to renew its commitment to multilateralism. It is a time for world leaders to bring a new mindset with the global citizenship to the key moments ahead of us in 2020, to create the foundation for a just transition to carbon net zero economy and redouble the efforts towards a world free of nuclear weapons. We can overcome these existential threats we face, but we must act together. We must work together. There's not a single country or individual, however powerful, however resourceful one may be, can do it alone. We have to all our hands on deck. We have all worked together. Ladies and gentlemen, let us work to address these two existential threats, nuclear threat as well as climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Brown.
It's very hard to find the words even to express the moment we now are in. What you're hearing this morning is really the voice of prophets of doom. Speaking of danger and destruction is never very easy. If you speak the truth, people will not want to listen because it's too awful, and it makes you sound like a crackpot. Our own president, in front of the Davos businessmen of the world, called out against what he called the prophets of doom. Now, he didn't particularize on what doom he was talking about, but I think back to the prophets of old, to Isaiah, to Jeremiah. They weren't listened either. Prophets are ones who don't necessarily know the future, but they warn of the danger that they see ahead. Today, we live in a world of vast, deep, and pervasive complacency. I'm not a scientist. I'm not officially one of the elders, although I'm getting up there. I'll be 82 in April. So let me speak from the position of someone who spent most of his life in politics. I've run for election more than most living human Americans. I've held a variety of offices. I've raised over $100 million from labor unions, from business groups, from rich individuals, from wherever I could find it. I have ceaselessly climbed the political ladder. I understand where we are, what that is. So I don't know about the science, but even if there's 1 in 100 chances that these men and women before you are correct, then we are truly in a dangerous moment. But you would never know that from the president, from the Republican leadership, or even from the Democratic leadership. Talking about what we're talking about today is profoundly deviant to our contemporary culture. We're not supposed to be here. We're not supposed to utter the truth about the power of mankind to destroy itself. So this is a very important moment. You who have a camera in your hand or a pencil in your hand or a computer, you have a chance to communicate the truth of this moment. How do we even find the words? I myself, I'm a person of limitless words, but I can't find how to say it in such a way that it can be heard. What is being said this morning is not being heard. It's being ignored, it's being denied, and it's being belittled, not by just right-wing Republicans, but by Democrats, by independents, by people of all walks of life. We are in a predicament because the power that mankind has generated is completely at variance with the seriousness with which it's understood, or the extent by which people understand it. So that's why the clock has been moved forward, 100 seconds before doomsday. Now people will say, well, what, that's not serious. Well, the moment is serious. Tell me, how else can we tell people where we're at? How else can we wake up the Democrats, the Republicans, the independents, the millionaires, the billionaires, the media owners, who carry on their life as though they're on the Titanic, about ready to hit an iceberg, and they're not worried? Very few people are worried. I have never in my entire life heard a group of scientists and serious statespeople say what they've just said. So let us not let the moment pass. Each one of us can do something. As I was listening this morning, I was on the edge of discouragement. But we're not there yet. The world is not over. We have incredible opportunity to reverse the nuclear arms race, the carbon emissions, and the headlong rush to ever more dangerous technology. It's within human hands. Where we are is not pointing us in the direction where we have to go. But this setting of the clock, this ability on the part of people here and the people who will hear what we say today will have the potential to do something, to turn things around. We won't always be talking about news of the day, whatever the momentary tweet, or impeachment, or all the other important things that need to be talked about. We will be able at some point, if we're lucky, and if we all work together, to wake people up. This is the moment. If there ever was to wake up, it's now, and those who have to wake up are you. And I hope that not one person here feels any cynicism, complacency, or feeling that we're not in this predicament. We're in it. It's dire, but we're not there yet. We can still pull back from the brink. But we have to do what we're not doing. Whatever we've done to date, it is totally inadequate on nuclear, on climate, and on the other dangerous technologies. We have to find a way to do more. We have to change the design of how we're behaving. When I say we, I mean people in this room. I mean Congress. I mean the campaign contributors. I've spent my life seeking the favor of these powerful people. I can tell you, most of them are totally ignorant, blind, and deaf to our predicament. So the task is wake up. Wake up, America. Wake up the world. It is 100 minutes before doomsday.
100 seconds before doomsday.
Seconds.
What?
It's 100 seconds to doomsday.
Seconds. Well, there it just shows you we don't even know what the hell we're talking about. There's Exhibit A of why we got a problem. It is definitely more serious than minutes. It's seconds.
I'd like to invite the Science and Security Board to come up and join us and to take some of your questions that you might have. And I'm looking at Alex, who's going to help me monitor the time of this part of this session. So from the media, we are available to take your questions. Yes, please. Is there a mic, Hallie, coming? Excuse me. We have right here. Where's the mic? Ariel, right. If you come to the front row here, just in front of Mary Robinson's seat there.
Thank you so much. Secretary General.
Could you identify yourself?
Certainly.
What news organization you're with?
Sure. Sam Hussein, I write for The Nation, Consortium News, as well as with the Institute for Public Accuracy, accuracy.org. Secretary General, isn't it imperative for the UN system to manifest itself? The U.S. Has apparently been interfering with the OPCW, There have been recent leaked documents confirming criticism that Ted Postel at MIT and others have had of politicizing of those reports. Apparently, the IAEA as well. We have the situation during the Iraq wars where the U.S. interfered with UNSCOM and UNMVIC, ultimately destroying them by launching wars or bombing campaigns in 1998, destroying UNSCOM and then destroying UNMVIC, obviously, with the invasion of Iraq. Isn't it imperative that the UN system stand up to interference, especially by its most powerful member? If I could, President Robinson, you are painfully aware of the importance of civil resistance, considering the horrors in Northern Ireland that hopefully are behind us. I covered the trial of the plowshares in October in Georgia. They went on these sort of, you'll be glad to know, almost all good Irish-American activists who went onto a nuclear base housing the nuclear Trident missile fleet. Among them is Father Stephen Kelly. He is facing decades in prison. He is currently still incarcerated. Doesn't civil action, Rachel, you spoke at the beginning of what can citizens do? These are citizens who are risking everything. They are trying to meet the prophetic moment, and they're being ignored by organizations as well as the media. Finally, to Mr. Brown.
We're going to leave it. We're going to leave it at 2.
I'm not filibustering. I'm
no,
really,
I know.
We got a whole crowd here.
Yeah. We're going to have.
Trying to raise.
They're very important. Absolutely. Let's stick to 2 questions there. Yes, please, Mr. Bond.
Thank you for raising this issue about multilateralism and the work of the United Nations. Nobody said that United Nations is perfect. It was agreed upon by 50 countries at the time, 1945, immediately after the Second World War. And we have been trying to make sure that United Nations works more efficient, more accountable, more transparent way. It's something like even in our private lives, in our family lives, or in our relationship with the friends. Even though we are born all equal, all member states of the United Nations are all equal. But in reality, there is some leading country. I think that is the United States. And the United States has given this idea of creating the United Nations based on human rights and all equality and peace and security and development issues. So it's very important ideals and values which we have been cherishing. Now it's a matter how you care, particularly as the global leader. Now by any standard, by any statistics, by any criteria, everybody understands and recognizes that the United States is the leading country. The leading country should do commensurate with their all privileges, now being respected as a leading country. Now then, as a former secretary, as I said, I'm deeply, deeply concerned, and as Mary just said, I'm angry by what when the United States has withdrawn from Human Rights Council, then when they have withdrawn from UNESCO, they are not providing support, humanitarian support for Palestinian refugees, and they are unilaterally abrogating this JCPOA. It was not only the United States, it's all P5 plus European Union. Then they should have discussed this matter before unilaterally canceling this hard negotiating, hard-fought negotiation. Iran is not the easy country. Iran is quite difficult to deal with when the member state, when you agree that member states are all equal. Therefore, I'm urging that President Trump should show much more global leadership based on global citizenship. In this era of 21st century, with the transformative development of science, technology, information, what we are now discussing is just transmitted within a fraction of a second. So we are just one family. We are living in a small planet Earth. Then there is no such boundaries. Instead of building walls among and people, country, I think he should build bridges among people and among countries. And I'm really appealing to President Trump and the global leaders to show their global leadership based on global citizens. We are all global citizens. Wherever you may be coming from, we are all same citizens. That's what I'm just urging and appealing to world leaders. Now, then there are so many issues which I've discussed. There is no architecture of nuclear governance issue. Then when the U.S. is just stepping out of human rights, how can they say and ask other leaders who are abusing human rights and human dignity in other parts? They will lose their credibility. This is my personal worry, as well as a former Secretary General. I'm just appealing again, just to come back to global leadership based on all these ideals and values of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson.
Maybe I can answer briefly the question about the importance of civil society, which I very much believe in for both of the issues that we've talked about. Two existential threats, and we're not on course with either to address. So that we need disruption. And you mentioned disruption on the nuclear side. I think I would prefer to focus particularly on disruption on the climate side. We see this disruption beginning to happen with children and young people and their Fridays for Future, with Extinction Rebellion, with some litigation, etc. That's a broad, bottom-up pressure that's been exerted on governments. There's also a very important top-down pressure that is now the pressure of more progressive business and investment. And voices like Mark Carney of the Bank of England, who will now take on a mandate on climate and finance for the UN, pressurizing governments. Why? Because governments are not taking the decisions they should be taking because they lack a kind of steel capacity to do that. I mean, we all understand this. The problem is the short-term horizon of elected representatives in all the countries. They want to get re-elected, so they won't take hard decisions unless there is disruptive pressure. And that is what we need.
Thank you. We're short on time and we have many questions. So I'm going to go right here with the gentleman in the suit next to Rod Ewing. Right.
Hi, my name is Seon Kim at Voice of America, and I have a question to the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. You emphasized that all the global society has to make an effort to simply denuclearize North Korea or something else. But I think not all the country is making an effort to do that. For example, China and Russia, we need the more effort as a global key member of global society. So first question is, what do you think about the role of the China and Russia to change the Kim Jong-un's mindset to the nuclear ambition?
Sir, we're going to leave it at one question. I know there's two and everyone has plenty, but that's a great one and a big one.
That is my question, including Kim Jong-un.
Thank you.
Everybody is very ambitious to ask all the questions around the world. Now, that's very good questions. Of course, the United States and the key Western countries have a very important role to play. I think, first of all, Republic of Korea. Republic of Korea is a directly a concerned party. So if South and North Korea can address all these pending issues, including denuclearization, that would be much, much ideal and desirable. But in reality, as a nuclear power state and as one of the Security Council permanent members, then U.S. also has a very important role. Now even North Korea recognizes and understands the United States is the country who is playing global leadership. That's why U.S. North Korea negotiation is also very important. That really augments and complements what South Korea and North Korea can do. So we, based on mostly reconciliation and peaceful reunification process, when it comes to a nuclear issue, it's another global issue. That is why Security Council is involved. The United States has been deeply involved now. The negotiation has not been progressing well, unlike heightened expectation which had happened during last 2 years, particularly since the Pyeongchang Olympic Games. And the Korean President Moon Jae-in has also shown his utmost sincere positions despite such negative reactions from North Korean side. I think President Moon should also be recognized for his sincere-most attitude and positions. So North Korea should really take that opportunity when President Trump was ready to engage with North Korea. And whole South Korean people are ready to engage and embrace North Korea and do whatever South Korea can do to help them, first of all, economically, make their country more, prosperous way, and also bring North Korea toward international community as one of the responsible members based on all these principles and values. That I am very much regret that North Korea has not taken the opportunity. Whatever concerns, whatever motives they might have had, but that's their problem. But they should act as a global member based on all global standards and values and principles. This is what all members of the United Nations expect North Korea to abide by. And this is a very sorry situation. Now, Russia, China can play also a very important role. Not only as one of the permanent members, they are neighboring countries. North Korea borders with China and Russia. Historically and traditionally and geographically, politically, in their ideology, they have been sharing same ideology, systems. And therefore, it is important that we ask China and Russia to play and advise whatever role they can play to North Korea. This is what President Xi Jinping has been doing, and we expect more from Russian side. But at this time, I think we are going through a very difficult process, momentum, because President Trump seems to be very much engaged in domestic politics, including presidential campaign and his impeachment trial, etc., etc. So political situation, circumstances seems to be not much favorable, but we should never be discouraged. We should never be discouraged. It is important that member states should really encourage North Korea to come forward to open society now. In this regard, I'd like to again go back to JCPOA regarding North Korean nuclear denuclearization process. It's important that any member state of the United Nations, including North Korea, should have reasonable expectation that whatever has been agreed upon should be implemented. And then if North Korea, from North Korean perspectives, if JCPOA, which has been with a lot of difficulty negotiated among T5 plus European Union, then it's been abrogated suddenly just with the change of US administration. Then if North Korea would, just suppose, North Korea were to engage sincerely in denuclearization process, then if there's a possibility of any other administration again change, abrogate, then it will not give much good incentive to North Korean side. Therefore, I'm really urging whatever has been agreed upon should be respected. Like a climate change again, it was agreed upon by 195 member states as well as state parties. Even non-member states have joined, and now 197. Then if one of the biggest emitting countries, like the United States, withdraws from this, then whole this equilibrium will be broken. And there will be political will be very much important. Therefore, I'm really urging the United States to play a global leadership role as a global leader based on the principles and values of the United Nations Charter. Thank you.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our time. I want to, we have our excerpts available to the media to follow up. I want to thank the media for being here today. And on behalf of the elders, Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, and certainly the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, I want to thank everybody, urge you to read the report that's on our website at thebulletin.org, and we look forward to moving the clock away from midnight in future years. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.